How's it going, guys? I'm Jared, and welcome back to Avalanche Reviews. Now, the more astute among you may remember that I tend to credit the fall of survival horror to the blockbuster hit that was Resident Evil 4. Now, maybe it's just me, but it seems like no one was interested in crafting a truly atmospheric horror title after they found out they could just copy RE4, and that really pisses me off. So today, let's take a look at a game that's often accused of ripping off the third-person giant and give it the fair shake it deserves. Okay, so stop me if you've heard this one before. You're a member of a law enforcement team investigating an area where another special forces team has disappeared. So, maybe not the most original opening, but there are some key differences between Cold Fear and its rich uncle Resident Evil. First off, you're Tom Henson, a member of a Coast Guard vessel, and you've been called to the SS Eastern Spirit not because you're a skilled combatant or a vital member of some special forces unit, but because a Navy SEALs team has disappeared on the vessel, and you were the closest to it. So you're the hero by default.
Well, Homer, I guess you're the winner by default.
Default! Woohoo! The two sweetest words in the English language. Default, default, default!
Well, after a bit of exploring, it becomes clear that something has indeed gone awry aboard the Eastern Spirit, and the only living people you have met are scared to death and have a tendency to yell at you in Russian and try their damnedest to kill you. With a little exploration and some personal diary reading, you soon learn that the crew of the ship have all come down with a bad case of being dead. Also about a Russian oil rig where a creature that would come to be known as an exocell was accidentally discovered, and since the oil rig was a joint operation owned by the Russian mafia and a mercenary group, naturally the exocell was swiftly taken to a lab for possible military applications, and this ship just so happened to be part of the testing process. Well, as you would expect, havoc was wreaked, the dead were reanimated, and a sinister plot was revealed. While you can obviously draw a lot of similarities between Cold Fear and Capcom's seminal horror franchise, the real fun is in the ways that the game separates itself from it. From our being forced to investigate the matter by the CIA who are withholding an evac, to the main character's likable and general chatty nature.
Why should I believe you?
Because I'm here and you're not dead.
Ha, funny.
There's a lot in the story that new players will find appealing. On the flip side, this game reads right out of the survival horror playbook, so fans of the greats in the genre will get a kick out of seeing an original spin on this familiar formula. Overall, Cold Fear provided a great self-contained narrative that was structured perfectly for keeping me interested. All the elements common to survival horror, like exploration, discovery, and backtracking, were all sprinkled with just enough tidbits of story to keep things interesting, and constantly had me playing just a couple minutes longer in order to see what would happen next.
You need to...
Now, I know after watching the footage in this review, the comparisons between Cold Fear and RE4 are unavoidable, but for a number of reasons, that's a little unfair. Among these, the most important is, Cold Fear was released just 2 months after RE4, and with that short of a gap between them, I think we can rule out the idea that developer Darkworks were trying to capitalize off of RE4's success. That being said, Cold Fear does use a very familiar over-the-shoulder view while aiming, but through the majority of the game you will be dealing with a hybrid of Resident Evil's tank controls and Silent Hill 3's 3D controls. What you would assume to be a jarring change from tank control exploration to third-person over-the-shoulder combat is actually surprisingly intuitive, and for you purists, there's a button to aim your weapon in classic survival horror form. Overall, controlling Tom just felt right, but I'd be lying if I said there weren't parts of the game that hindered that experience. 90% of the time, the game will have you in environments that allow the controls to shine, but every once in a while you'll find yourself in a cramped room that makes controlling Tom a chore. For example, this room's lights have just went out, and the only light I have is on my gun, so I aim my weapon and try to check out the area. But it's really cramped, and the walls keep forcing Tom to point his gun upwards, effectively taking away the only source of light in the room. Now I do want to point out this only happened 2 or maybe 3 times, but they were nuisances that could have been avoided if these rooms would have just been designed as well as the rest of the game was. Other than these instances, I found Cold Fear a great little hybrid of modern and classic survival horror. Since comparisons between it and RE4 are impossible to avoid, I will say that those of you expecting the same experience will find Cold Fear's controls a little less polished and a bit looser. But between its 2 control schemes, I imagine fans of both old and new horror games will likely find something they like. At the time of Cold Fear's release, developers were already maxing out that generation's game consoles in terms of raw graphical performance. Games were being released that pushed their respective platforms to the limits, and knowing how much competition that it had to deal with, I'm still impressed with how amazing Cold Fear looks. Character models look amazing and animate fluidly, and while we're on the subject, they kinda remind me of that almost cartoony design found in the Time Splitters series. The game's environments are also praiseworthy, with an impressive use of lighting and a real eye for detail in their design. Everything is laid out in a way that compels you to explore further. It's kind of hard to explain, but it was almost like the interesting design of the environments around me pushed me to discover more. Throughout the whole game, I got flashbacks of earlier Resident Evil games, as some areas used far-off camera positions to emulate that pre-rendered feel. One thing that Cold Fear really nailed was the use of particle and weather effects. The first part of the game is spent on a ship, and it seems like an unproportional amount of time was spent on perfecting the ship's violent rocking and the waves that often crash onto the deck. When running around up on deck or even below, there's a real feeling that you're actually on a boat. As the vessel moves back and forth, Tom actually moves his body to counter it. After a while, you start to get the feel for the ship's rocking, and this went a long way in making me feel immersed in the game. Now, in full disclosure, the footage you're looking at is from the PC release of the game, but rest assured the PS2 and Xbox versions are nothing to scoff at. While the PC port obviously runs at a much higher resolution, it hasn't added anything that wasn't present in the console versions. Graphically, Cold Fear is one of those titles that should have been a benchmark for the consoles of its generation. But sadly, the game's lackluster sales made sure that most mainstream gamers wouldn't truly know how far their favorite console could be pushed. If you're looking for an old PS2 era game to put some of your modern titles to shame, then you may want to book yourself a ticket aboard the SS Cold Fear. Alright guys, you've heard the long version, but let's break down the pros and cons to see if Cold Fear will be the horror game for you. For a PS2 era game, Cold Fear sports some amazing graphics. Environmental effects like rain, waves, and creepy lighting really immerse you in the game. While a modern-ish game, Cold Fear evokes a very classic survival horror feel. There are some areas in the game that don't facilitate its controls too well and feel a little too cramped. While Cold Fear sports some great sound design, the guns just don't sound right. I really did enjoy the inclusion of the 2 control schemes, but it did take a little practice before I got used to them. When it comes to survival horror, we fans don't exactly have a wealth of titles to choose from. But thanks to Cold Fear, I now have one more game to hold to the high standards of the genre. For those of you yearning for a semi-modern horror game with a creamy survival horror center, this is your lucky day. And for you guys that loved Resident Evil 4, this may be something to wash the taste of Resident Evil 6 out of your mouth. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here, but I will be back soon. So as usual, I'm Jared.
Eyes only clearance, I guess.
And this has been Avalanche Reviews. Thanks for checking out another episode, guys. If you love horror games, feel free to check out some more horror reviews right here. And if you're looking to stay updated on my ridiculous opinions, you can find me on Twitter and Facebook. For you newcomers, make sure to hit that subscribe button so I can hurry up and become a millionaire. You do want me to become a millionaire, right?